What becomes truly interesting is that money itself is rarely the real issue. Beneath every financial decision, every risk we take, every opportunity we ignore, and every goal we pursue, there is often a deeper force at work. That force is human consciousness. When I examine the lives of people who consistently create value, adapt to change, and build lasting prosperity, I notice a pattern that is often overlooked. The difference is not always intelligence, it is not always education, it is not even the amount of effort they invest. More often, the difference begins with the invisible assumptions they carry about themselves and about the world around them. Many people spend years trying to change external circumstances while leaving their internal patterns untouched. They search for better strategies, better investments, better jobs, or better opportunities. Yet the lens through which they interpret reality remains the same. As a result, the same emotional reactions continue to produce the same choices, and the same choices often lead to the same outcomes. Modern neuroscience offers an important insight here. The brain is constantly filtering information. Every second, we are exposed to far more sensory data than we can consciously process. To manage this overwhelming flow of information, the brain prioritizes what appears relevant based on our beliefs, expectations, and previous experiences. In practical terms, this means that two people can stand in the same environment and notice completely different opportunities. Imagine walking through a crowded city street. One person sees competition, scarcity, and obstacles. Another sees unmet needs, potential partnerships, and emerging possibilities. The environment is identical. The interpretation is different. And that interpretation influences behavior. This is where many discussions about wealth become more profound. Wealth creation is not only a financial process, it is also a cognitive and emotional process. The quality of our attention influences the quality of our decisions. The quality of our decisions influences the direction of our lives. What makes this especially fascinating is the connection between thought, emotion, and biology. Thoughts alone are often weak motivators. Most people have positive thoughts occasionally, yet lasting change usually requires something more powerful. It requires emotional engagement. When an idea becomes emotionally meaningful, the body begins responding differently. Stress levels shift, motivation changes, focus sharpens, memory becomes stronger. We literally experience the world through a different physiological state. Think about a time when you felt deeply inspired. Perhaps you were pursuing a meaningful goal or imagining a future that genuinely excited you. Notice how different your energy felt compared to moments dominated by fear or self-doubt. The circumstances may not have changed immediately, but your perception and behavior likely did. Ancient traditions observed this relationship long before modern science developed sophisticated instruments. Across cultures, there was a recurring understanding that inner states shape outer experiences. Today, neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral economics continue to reveal how beliefs and emotions influence perception, decision-making, and performance. This does not mean that positive thinking magically creates wealth. Reality is far more practical than that. Action remains essential. Skills matter. Knowledge matters. Economic conditions matter. Yet our internal state often determines how effectively we use the resources available to us. Consider two individuals facing the same setback. One interprets the challenge as evidence of personal failure. The other views it as feedback and an opportunity to learn. The event is identical, but the meaning assigned to it creates dramatically different futures. Meaning is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. We do not respond solely to events. We respond to our interpretation of events. Once we understand this principle, we begin recognizing how much influence we actually possess. This understanding invites us to become observers of our own mental habits. What stories do we repeat about money? What assumptions do we carry about success? What emotional patterns emerge when we think about abundance, opportunity, or uncertainty? Many of these patterns were formed years ago. Some originated through personal experiences. Others were absorbed from family, culture, or social environments. Over time, repeated thoughts can become automatic narratives that operate beneath conscious awareness. The challenge is that unconscious narratives often feel like objective reality. We stop questioning them because they seem familiar, yet familiarity is not the same as truth. One practical exercise I often recommend is simple observation. For a week, pay attention to your emotional responses whenever money enters your thoughts. Do you experience tension, excitement, fear, confidence, frustration, or possibility? Do not judge the response. Simply notice it. Awareness creates space. And within that space, new choices become possible. Another useful practice involves connecting financial goals to deeper values. Instead of focusing exclusively on numbers, ask yourself what those numbers represent. Freedom, creativity, security, contribution, growth. The clearer the meaning behind a goal, the more energy and consistency we bring to pursuing it. This shift may appear subtle, yet it changes the relationship we have with success. The pursuit becomes less about chasing symbols and more about expressing values through action. Over time, we begin to understand that prosperity is not merely a result of external accumulation. It is also connected to adaptability, emotional resilience, self-awareness, and the capacity to recognize possibilities that others overlook. And perhaps this is where the conversation becomes most intriguing, because once we start exploring how attention shapes perception, how perception influences behavior, and how behavior gradually transforms outcomes, we uncover an even deeper question about the relationship between consciousness and the reality we experience every day. And that deeper question invites us to look beyond money itself and examine the hidden processes through which human beings create their experience of reality. Because when most people think about wealth, they focus on visible results. They see businesses, investments, possessions, and financial success. What they rarely see are the invisible patterns of attention, emotion, and behavior that existed long before those results appeared. One of the most overlooked principles in personal development is that our lives tend to move in the direction of our dominant focus. This does not mean we attract outcomes through wishful thinking. It means that attention acts like a spotlight. Whatever we consistently focus upon becomes easier to recognize, easier to remember, and easier to act upon. Think about buying a new car. Before making the purchase, you may have barely noticed that model on the road. Suddenly, after deciding it matters, you begin seeing it everywhere. The cars were always there. What changed was your awareness. The same mechanism operates in every area of life, including finances. If a person constantly focuses on limitations, their attention becomes trained to notice obstacles. If another person focuses on solutions, innovation, and possibility, their attention becomes trained to notice opportunities. Neither perspective changes reality itself, but each changes the information that reaches conscious awareness. This understanding has profound implications. It suggests that one of the most valuable assets we possess is not money, education, or even talent. It is the ability to direct our attention intentionally. Unfortunately, many people surrender this ability without realizing it. Their attention is pulled in countless directions by fear, comparison, distraction, and emotional reactions. Instead of consciously choosing where their energy goes, they become passive observers of whatever captures their focus. The result is predictable. Energy becomes fragmented. Decisions become reactive. Long-term goals lose momentum. This is why emotional regulation plays such an important role in achievement. When we are overwhelmed by stress, the brain naturally shifts into survival-oriented thinking. Immediate threats appear more important than future possibilities. Creativity decreases, patience diminishes. Strategic thinking becomes more difficult. From a biological perspective, this response is understandable. The human nervous system evolved to protect us from danger, yet many modern challenges are not immediate physical threats. Financial uncertainty, career transitions, and personal growth require thoughtful responses rather than instinctive reactions. The problem arises when the body cannot distinguish between a genuine emergency and a stressful thought repeated thousands of times. In both situations, similar physiological responses may occur. Heart rate changes, stress hormones increase, attention narrows. Over time, this creates a powerful cycle. Stress influences thinking. Thinking reinforces stress. Eventually, the pattern feels normal. Breaking this cycle begins with awareness. We must learn to recognize when our emotions are informing us and when they are controlling us. There is a significant difference between the two. Emotions contain valuable information. Fear may highlight a genuine risk. Excitement may reveal a meaningful opportunity. Frustration may indicate a need for change. But emotions become problematic when they dictate every decision without reflection. Imagine standing at the edge of a new opportunity. Perhaps it is a business idea, a career move, or a skill you want to develop. Fear immediately appears. Most people assume fear means stop, yet often fear simply means growth is occurring. Every significant transformation requires stepping beyond familiar territory. The unknown naturally creates discomfort. The question is not whether discomfort exists. The question is whether we interpret discomfort as danger or development. This distinction changes everything. The individuals who consistently grow are not necessarily fearless. More often, they have developed a different relationship with uncertainty. They understand that uncertainty is not the enemy of success. In many cases, uncertainty is the environment in which success is created. Ancient wisdom traditions repeatedly emphasize the importance of inner mastery for this reason. Long before modern psychology emerged, observers of human behavior recognized that external achievement and internal development are deeply connected. A person who cannot manage attention, emotion, and perception will struggle to manage larger opportunities when they appear. Modern research increasingly supports this observation. Studies in behavioral psychology demonstrate that habits often predict outcomes more reliably than intentions. People rarely rise to the level of their occasional motivation. Instead, they tend to follow the patterns they practice repeatedly. This insight shifts the conversation away from dramatic breakthroughs and toward daily choices. Prosperity is often less about a single life-changing moment and more about thousands of small decisions compounded over time. A person who consistently learns new skills gains an advantage. A person who consistently saves and invests gains an advantage. A person who consistently develops emotional resilience gains an advantage. None of these actions seem extraordinary on a given day. Yet over years, the results become remarkable. Nature itself illustrates this principle. Massive rivers carve through stone not because of sudden force, but because of persistent movement. Forests grow gradually. Seasons change gradually. Most meaningful transformation follows the same pattern. Yet modern culture often encourages impatience. We are surrounded by stories of overnight success, instant wealth, and rapid achievement. These stories can create unrealistic expectations. When progress appears slower than expected, many people abandon the process before the results become visible. What they fail to recognize is that much of growth occurs beneath the surface. Consider a seed planted in fertile soil. For a period of time, nothing appears to happen, yet beneath the ground, essential development is occurring. Roots are forming, structures are strengthening, systems are preparing for visible growth. Human development follows a similar pattern. Long before external results emerge, internal changes are taking place, new beliefs are forming, new habits are developing, new levels of awareness are emerging. This invisible phase often tests our patience because the external evidence has not yet arrived. We want proof, we want certainty, we want immediate confirmation that our efforts are working. But some of the most important transformations occur before visible results can be measured. And this brings us to another hidden aspect of prosperity that few people fully appreciate, because once we understand how attention shapes perception, how perception influences action, and how consistent action gradually transforms outcomes, we begin to see that our relationship with time itself may be one of the greatest factors determining whether opportunity expands or quietly slips through our hands. And our relationship with time reveals something that many people never fully understand. Most individuals measure progress by immediate results. They look at what happened today, this week, or this month. If visible evidence is missing, they assume nothing is changing. Yet some of the most powerful forces in life operate through accumulation rather than instant transformation. Consider how a tree grows. Day by day, the change is almost invisible. Stand beside it for 24 hours, and you may notice nothing at all. Yet return after several years, and the difference is undeniable. Growth was occurring the entire time, even when it could not be easily observed. Human development follows the same principle. Every thought we repeatedly entertain, every emotional state we consistently reinforce, and every action we habitually perform contributes to a larger pattern. These small influences accumulate quietly until they eventually become impossible to ignore. This is why patience is often misunderstood. Many people associate patience with passive waiting, but true patience is active participation in a process whose results have not yet fully appeared. It is the ability to continue aligning actions with a vision even when external confirmation remains limited. When we understand this, we begin viewing our daily choices differently. A single productive day may not transform our finances. A single healthy meal may not transform our body. A single act of courage may not transform our future. Yet repeated consistently, these actions create entirely different outcomes. The challenge is that the human mind is naturally attracted to immediate rewards. We are wired to notice what produces instant feedback. Long-term benefits require a different kind of awareness. They require trust in processes that unfold gradually. Behavioral scientists often describe this as delayed gratification, the ability to prioritize future rewards over immediate comfort. Again and again, research has shown that this ability influences success across many areas of life. Not because disciplined people possess some special gift, but because they understand the value of consistency. Consistency may not appear exciting, it rarely creates dramatic headlines, yet it remains one of the most powerful forces available to us. Imagine two individuals beginning from similar circumstances. One spends years reacting emotionally to every challenge, constantly changing direction whenever difficulties arise. The other maintains a steady commitment to learning, improving, and adapting. At first, their paths may look nearly identical. Over time, however, the gap between them becomes enormous. The difference was never a single decision. The difference was accumulated direction. This idea becomes even more important when we examine how beliefs interact with behavior. Many people assume beliefs exist only in the mind. In reality, beliefs often express themselves through actions. If someone believes opportunities are scarce, they may hesitate to take risks. If someone believes growth is possible, they may pursue new experiences despite uncertainty. The belief itself is invisible, but its behavioral consequences become visible over time. This is one reason self-awareness matters so much. We cannot transform patterns we refuse to examine. Hidden assumptions continue influencing our choices, whether we recognize them or not. A useful exercise is to observe recurring themes in your life without judgment. Where do you repeatedly feel stuck? Which challenges appear again and again? What emotional reactions consistently emerge during moments of uncertainty? Often, these patterns point toward deeper beliefs operating beneath conscious awareness. For example, a person may desire financial growth while simultaneously fearing failure, criticism, or rejection. Consciously, they move toward opportunity. Unconsciously, they move away from perceived danger. The result is internal conflict. This conflict consumes energy, it creates hesitation, it generates inconsistency. When people experience this struggle, they often assume they lack motivation. In reality, they may simply be divided between competing internal narratives. Resolving that division begins with honesty. We must become willing to examine the stories we tell ourselves. Not to criticize them, but to understand them. Where did these stories originate? Are they based on present reality or past experiences? Do they expand possibility or restrict it? Most importantly, are they helping us create the future we genuinely desire? These questions may seem simple, yet they have extraordinary power. Throughout history, some of the greatest breakthroughs occurred when individuals challenged assumptions that everyone else accepted as fact. Progress often begins when someone becomes curious enough to question familiar limitations. The same principle applies to personal growth. Many of our perceived limitations are not objective barriers, they are interpretations that have become deeply familiar. This does not mean every obstacle is imaginary. Real challenges exist. Economic conditions exist. Competition exists. Uncertainty exists. But our response to these realities often determines whether they become permanent barriers or temporary challenges. Resilience emerges from this understanding. Resilience is not the absence of difficulty. It is the capacity to remain aligned with our values and purpose despite difficulty. It is the ability to learn from setbacks without becoming defined by them. When we study people who have overcome extraordinary obstacles, we frequently discover a common characteristic. They maintain meaning even during uncertainty. They continue finding purpose when circumstances become difficult. They refuse to allow temporary conditions to determine their identity. That distinction is critical. Circumstances describe situations. Identity describes who we believe we are. Confusing the two can be profoundly limiting. A financial setback is a circumstance. It is not an identity. A mistake is a circumstance. It is not an identity. A period of uncertainty is a circumstance. It is not an identity. The moment we separate who we are from what we are experiencing, new possibilities begin to emerge. We gain the freedom to respond rather than merely react. And perhaps this is where the deeper relationship between consciousness and prosperity becomes most apparent. Because wealth in its broadest sense is not simply the accumulation of resources. It is also the development of clarity, adaptability, emotional intelligence, and the ability to recognize value where others see only obstacles. The more consciously we direct our attention, the more intentionally we shape our choices. The more intentionally we shape our choices, the more influence we have over the trajectory of our lives. Yet there is still another layer to explore, one that connects perception, emotion, biology, and human potential in a way that challenges many conventional assumptions about what is truly possible when the mind and body begin working together as a unified system. And when the mind and body begin functioning as a unified system rather than competing forces, we enter a dimension of human potential that is often overlooked. Most people think of thoughts as one thing and biology as another. They imagine the mind operating independently from the body. Yet modern science increasingly reveals that these systems are deeply interconnected, constantly exchanging information in ways we are only beginning to understand. Every experience we have creates a response throughout the body. A stressful thought can trigger measurable physiological changes. A hopeful expectation can alter motivation and behavior. A sense of purpose can influence energy levels and persistence. The boundary between psychological experience and biological response is far more dynamic than many people realize. Think about a moment when you received unexpected good news. Before you consciously analyzed the information, your body had already responded. Your posture changed, your breathing shifted, your facial expressions transformed. Energy moved through your entire system. Now compare that with a moment of anxiety or uncertainty. The body responds differently. Muscles tighten, attention narrows, physical tension increases. The event itself may exist outside of us, but our internal interpretation determines much of the physiological response. This understanding carries significant implications because our repeated emotional states gradually become familiar biological patterns. The body learns what it experiences most often. Over time, certain ways of feeling can become so familiar that they begin operating automatically. This does not mean we are trapped by those patterns. It means we must become aware of them. Many individuals unknowingly rehearse stress every day. They revisit old disappointments, imagine future problems, and repeatedly activate the same emotional responses. Eventually, these reactions feel normal simply because they are familiar. The challenge is that familiarity is often mistaken for truth. Just because an emotional pattern feels natural does not mean it serves our highest potential. It may simply mean we have practiced it repeatedly. Fortunately, the same principle works in our favor. If repeated experiences strengthen patterns, then intentional practice can strengthen new ones. This is where personal transformation becomes less mysterious and more practical. Change is rarely the result of a single insight. More often, it emerges through repetition, awareness, and consistent application. Imagine learning to play a musical instrument. Reading about music is not enough. Understanding theory is not enough. Growth occurs through practice. Neural pathways strengthen through repetition, skills developed through experience. The same is true for emotional resilience, confidence, and self-awareness. Knowledge creates possibility. Practice creates transformation. This distinction explains why many people consume endless information yet experience little change. They collect concepts without integrating them into daily life. Intellectual understanding becomes a substitute for embodied experience. Real growth requires participation. If we want greater confidence, we must practice courageous action. If we want greater clarity, we must practice intentional reflection. If we want greater resilience, we must practice responding differently when challenges arise. These practices may seem small in the moment, yet they gradually reshape how we interact with reality. One of the most powerful exercises involves observing our attention throughout the day. Where does it naturally go? Does it gravitate toward possibilities or problems, toward learning or distraction, toward creation or reaction? Attention functions like a currency. Wherever it flows, energy follows. Wherever energy flows, development occurs. Most people carefully manage their finances while giving little consideration to where their attention is invested. Yet attention may be an even more valuable resource because it influences every decision that follows. When attention is fragmented, progress becomes difficult. When attention is focused, remarkable things become possible. Consider how innovators, creators, scientists, and entrepreneurs often describe periods of deep concentration. During these moments, distractions fade into the background. Energy becomes organized around a meaningful objective. Creativity expands. Solutions emerge. This state is not magical. It is a natural consequence of directed awareness. The same principle can be applied to personal growth. Instead of scattering energy across countless concerns, we can choose a smaller number of priorities and engage them fully. This approach creates momentum. Momentum is another force that is frequently misunderstood. Many people wait for motivation before taking action. Yet action often creates motivation rather than the other way around. A person begins exercising and gradually gains energy. A person starts learning a new skill and gradually gains confidence. A person takes a small step toward a meaningful goal and gradually develops greater commitment. Momentum builds because each action provides evidence that progress is possible. This evidence matters because the human mind constantly seeks confirmation for what it believes. When we repeatedly act in alignment with growth, we begin gathering proof that change can occur. Confidence becomes less dependent on positive thinking and more dependent on lived experience. Over time, identity begins to shift. We no longer see ourselves as someone attempting growth. We begin seeing ourselves as someone who grows. We no longer see ourselves as someone attempting discipline. We begin seeing ourselves as someone who follows through. This transformation may appear subtle, yet it changes behavior in profound ways. Actions that once required tremendous effort gradually become part of who we are. Ancient observers of human nature understood this principle intuitively. They recognized that lasting transformation occurs when knowledge moves beyond the intellect and becomes integrated into daily living. Modern science often arrives at similar conclusions through different language. Repeated behaviors strengthen neural pathways. Habits become automatic. Consistent actions influence identity. Different frameworks, similar observations, and perhaps this convergence between ancient insight and modern understanding is worth paying attention to, because when independent perspectives repeatedly point toward the same underlying principles, we may be discovering something fundamental about human nature. We begin to see that prosperity, growth, and fulfillment are not isolated events. They emerge from countless interactions between attention, emotion, belief, behavior, and biology. Each element influences the others. Each becomes part of a larger system. And once we recognize life as an interconnected system rather than a collection of separate events, an even more fascinating question emerges. If our inner state influences how we perceive opportunities, how we respond to challenges, and how we direct our energy, then what happens when entire groups of people begin sharing similar beliefs, emotions, and expectations at the same time, creating collective patterns that shape not only individual outcomes, but the environments in which those outcomes unfold? And when we begin examining collective patterns rather than individual behavior alone, a much larger picture starts to emerge. Human beings do not exist in isolation. Every thought, decision, innovation, and cultural movement develops within networks of relationships. Families influence beliefs. Communities influence expectations. Organizations influence behavior. Entire societies influence what people perceive as possible. This means that many of our assumptions about money, success, and opportunity are not purely personal. They are often inherited through repeated exposure to collective narratives. Think about how different cultures view risk. In some environments, experimentation is encouraged, failure is treated as feedback, innovation is rewarded. In other environments, mistakes may carry greater social consequences, causing individuals to become more cautious. Neither perspective appears automatically within a person. Both emerge through interaction with larger systems. The same principle applies to financial thinking. From childhood onward, people absorb countless messages about wealth, work, achievement, security, and value. Some of these messages empower growth. Others create limitations. Most are accepted without conscious examination. As a result, many individuals spend years operating according to assumptions they never intentionally chose. This realization can be surprisingly liberating. Why? Because once we recognize that some beliefs were inherited rather than consciously created, we gain the ability to evaluate them. We can ask whether those ideas still serve us. We can determine whether they align with present reality. We can decide whether they support the future we want to build. Awareness transforms passive acceptance into conscious choice. Yet collective influence extends beyond beliefs alone. Human emotions are also remarkably social. We constantly affect one another through attitudes, expectations, and behavior. Consider how quickly enthusiasm spreads through a group working toward a meaningful goal. One person's energy influences another. Optimism becomes contagious. Momentum increases. The opposite can occur as well. Fear spreads, doubt spreads, pessimism spreads. This is not merely a philosophical observation. Psychologists have long studied how emotions influence social groups. People unconsciously mirror expressions, behaviors, and emotional states around them. In many situations, individuals absorb the atmosphere of their environment without realizing it. This raises an important question. If environments influence us, how intentionally are we choosing the environments we participate in? The people we spend time with shape our thinking. The information we consume shapes our thinking. The conversations we repeatedly engage in shape our thinking. Over months and years, these influences accumulate. That does not mean we should avoid people who think differently. Diversity of perspective often strengthens understanding. However, it does mean we should become conscious of the emotional and intellectual environments we regularly inhabit. Do they encourage growth? Do they encourage learning? Do they encourage responsibility and possibility? Or do they reinforce limitation, fear, and helplessness? These questions matter because environments often influence behavior more powerfully than motivation alone. A person determined to improve may struggle in an environment that constantly discourages progress. Conversely, a supportive environment can accelerate development by providing encouragement, feedback, and opportunity. This understanding helps explain why communities play such an important role in achievement. Growth rarely occurs entirely alone. Even the most independent individuals benefit from relationships that challenge them, inspire them, and expand their perspective. Throughout history, many breakthroughs emerged through collaboration rather than isolation. Ideas evolved through dialogue. Innovations emerged through shared effort. Progress accelerated when individuals combine their knowledge and resources. Prosperity often follows a similar pattern. The popular image of success frequently emphasizes individual accomplishment. Yet many meaningful achievements depend upon cooperation. Businesses require teams, markets require exchange, opportunities often arise through relationships. In this sense, wealth creation is not merely about accumulation. It is also about contribution. Value tends to flow toward those who solve problems, create solutions, improve systems, or help others achieve desired outcomes. The greater the value provided, the greater the potential impact. This perspective changes the way we think about financial growth. Instead of asking, how do I get more? We begin asking, how can I create more value? That question shifts attention outward. It encourages curiosity. It encourages creativity. It encourages service through contribution. Ironically, many of the most successful individuals focus less on chasing rewards and more on solving meaningful problems. Financial results often emerge as a consequence of value created rather than a goal pursued in isolation. This principle appears repeatedly across industries, generations, and economic conditions. People who identify needs and respond effectively tend to create opportunities. People who continue learning tend to adapt. People who adapt tend to remain relevant. And relevance creates possibilities. This process is especially important during periods of rapid change. Technology evolves, markets evolve, skills evolve, entire industries transform. In such environments, flexibility becomes more valuable than certainty. Many people seek permanent certainty before taking action. They want guarantees, they want complete clarity, they want assurance that every step will succeed. Yet life rarely operates that way. Growth often requires movement before complete certainty arrives. The future reveals itself gradually through engagement. This does not mean acting recklessly. It means recognizing that perfect certainty is often unavailable. Waiting indefinitely for ideal conditions can become a subtle form of avoidance. The individuals who navigate change effectively are usually those who remain curious. They continue learning. They continue adapting. They remain willing to update their assumptions when new information becomes available. Curiosity may be one of the most underrated qualities in personal development. A curious person asks better questions. Better questions lead to better observations. Better observations lead to better decisions, and better decisions compound over time. When viewed from this perspective, prosperity becomes less about luck and more about participation. It emerges through awareness, learning, adaptation, contribution, and consistent action. Of course, external factors still matter. Circumstances matter, timing matters, resources matter, yet our ability to respond to those factors often determines whether opportunities expand or disappear. And this brings us to a particularly fascinating aspect of human potential. Because beneath our habits, beneath our beliefs, beneath even our emotional patterns, there exists another capacity that has shaped explorers, inventors, creators, and visionaries throughout history. A capacity that allows people to perceive possibilities before tangible evidence exists, and to act upon those possibilities in ways that eventually transform both their lives and the world around them. And that capacity is imagination. Not imagination in the sense of fantasy or wishful thinking, but imagination as a uniquely human ability to mentally explore possibilities before they become physical realities. Every invention, every breakthrough, every great work of creativity existed first as an idea in someone's mind before it appeared in the external world. This is one of the most remarkable characteristics of human consciousness. We can experience a future event internally before it occurs externally. We can rehearse actions before taking them. We can envision solutions before they exist. In many ways, imagination acts as a bridge between present circumstances and future possibilities. Consider an architect designing a building. Long before construction begins, the structure exists mentally. The architect explores shapes, relationships, functions, and possibilities. Eventually, those invisible concepts become visible forms. The same process operates throughout life. An entrepreneur imagines a service before creating it. A scientist imagines a hypothesis before testing it. An athlete imagines successful performance before competition. A leader imagines a better future before guiding others toward it. Imagination alone is not enough. Action remains essential. Yet action often begins with an expanded vision of what might be possible. The challenge is that many adults gradually stop using imagination constructively. As responsibilities increase and routines become established, attention narrows toward what already exists. Possibility becomes overshadowed by familiarity. This shift is understandable, but it carries consequences. When we focus exclusively on current circumstances, we often assume the future must resemble the present. Existing limitations appear permanent. Existing challenges appear fixed. Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that today's reality is not necessarily tomorrow's reality. Technological revolutions transformed communication. Scientific discoveries transformed medicine. Creative innovations transformed industries. Human progress has always depended upon individuals willing to imagine beyond existing conditions. The same principle applies at the personal level. Many of the limitations people experience are not caused solely by external circumstances. They are also influenced by the boundaries of expectation. If I believe growth is impossible, I stop looking for opportunities. If I believe improvement is unlikely, I stop investing effort. If I believe change cannot occur, I unconsciously reinforce existing patterns. Notice that in each case, the belief influences behavior. The future is shaped not by imagination alone, but by the actions imagination either inspires or discourages. This is why vision plays such an important role in achievement. Vision provides direction. Direction organizes energy. Organized energy increases effectiveness. Without direction, effort becomes scattered. A person may work hard yet make little progress because attention constantly shifts between competing priorities. With direction, even modest actions begin accumulating toward a meaningful objective. Think about a ship crossing an ocean. Small adjustments in course may seem insignificant on a given day. Yet over thousands of miles, those adjustments determine the destination. Human lives often operate in a similar way. Small choices influence habits. Habits influence behavior. Behavior influences outcomes, and outcomes influence future opportunities. This interconnected chain explains why clarity is so valuable. Clarity does not guarantee success. It does, however, reduce unnecessary confusion. When we know what matters most, decision-making becomes simpler. We stop chasing every possibility and begin focusing on the opportunities most aligned with our values and goals. Interestingly, clarity often emerges through action rather than endless analysis. Many people believe they must have every answer before beginning. They wait for complete certainty, perfect understanding, or ideal conditions. Yet real-world experience frequently teaches lessons that theory alone cannot provide. A person learns entrepreneurship by building. A person learns communication by communicating. A person learns leadership by leading. Action creates information. Information creates insight. Insight creates refinement. This cycle of learning through engagement has driven human progress for thousands of years. At the same time, imagination becomes most powerful when balanced with reality. Vision without action remains a dream. Action without vision often becomes aimless effort. The most effective approach combines both. We imagine possibilities. We test ideas. We learn from results. We adjust our course. Then we continue moving forward. This process may appear simple, yet it reflects one of the deepest principles underlying growth. Progress rarely follows a straight line. It emerges through continual adaptation. Nature itself demonstrates this principle everywhere. Rivers adjust their path around obstacles. Plants adapt to changing conditions. Living systems remain resilient because they respond rather than remain rigid. Human beings possess the same capacity. Resilience is not about controlling every circumstance. It is about maintaining direction while adapting to reality. The individuals who thrive during uncertainty often understand this intuitively. They do not expect life to unfold exactly as planned. Instead, they remain flexible enough to adjust while staying committed to their larger purpose. Purpose provides stability during change. Without purpose, challenges can feel overwhelming because every obstacle appears to threaten our progress. With purpose, obstacles become part of the journey rather than evidence that the journey should end. This perspective influences emotional well-being as well. People who connect their efforts to meaningful goals often demonstrate greater persistence. They recover more quickly from setbacks. They maintain motivation during difficult periods because their actions are connected to something larger than immediate results. Purpose creates coherence. It aligns thoughts, emotions, and behaviors around a common direction. When this alignment occurs, energy becomes more focused. Distractions lose some of their power. Decisions become easier because they can be evaluated according to whether they support or undermine the larger objective. Yet even purpose, imagination, and disciplined action do not fully explain human potential. There is another dimension that deserves attention. Throughout history, remarkable achievements have often emerged from moments of insight that seem to arrive unexpectedly. Scientists describe sudden breakthroughs. Artists describe creative inspiration. Inventors describe solutions appearing after long periods of effort. These experiences suggest that the mind may operate on levels deeper than ordinary conscious thought. Sometimes the answers we seek emerge not during intense concentration, but during moments of reflection, stillness, or openness. The conscious mind works diligently on a problem, yet the breakthrough appears later almost as if another process has been quietly organizing information behind the scenes. And once we begin exploring the relationship between focused effort, subconscious processing, creativity, and insight, we encounter a fascinating question that has intrigued thinkers, researchers, and innovators for generations. What role does the deeper mind play in shaping the possibilities we are able to perceive, pursue, and ultimately bring into reality? And that question leads us into one of the most fascinating areas of human experience, the relationship between the conscious mind and the deeper processes operating beneath our immediate awareness. Most of us spend our lives identifying with conscious thought. We notice the inner dialogue, the decisions we make, and the plans we create. Yet a vast amount of mental activity occurs outside of conscious attention. Every day, the brain processes enormous amounts of information. Patterns are detected, memories are organized, and experiences are compared against previous knowledge. Much of this activity happens automatically. We may not be aware of it, but it continuously influences perception, judgment, and behavior. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. At first, every movement requires deliberate attention. Balance feels difficult, coordination feels unnatural. But after enough practice, the skill becomes automatic. The deeper mind absorbs the pattern and begins performing it with minimal conscious effort. This process occurs throughout life. We develop automatic ways of thinking, automatic emotional responses, automatic habits, automatic interpretations. In many situations, these patterns are helpful. They conserve mental energy and allow us to function efficiently. However, patterns can also become limitations when they continue operating long after their usefulness is ended. A belief formed years ago may still influence decisions today. An emotional response developed during one stage of life may continue shaping behavior in a completely different context. A habit created under specific circumstances may persist, even when those circumstances no longer exist. The deeper mind is incredibly powerful, but it does not automatically distinguish between patterns that support growth and patterns that restrict it. It simply strengthens what is repeated. This is why repetition matters so much. Whatever we repeatedly think, feel, and do gradually becomes familiar. Whatever becomes familiar often becomes automatic. The encouraging news is that this process works in both directions. Just as unhelpful patterns can be reinforced, constructive patterns can be strengthened as well. This understanding transforms personal development from a mysterious process into a practical one. Instead of waiting for dramatic breakthroughs, we can focus on consistent experiences that gradually reshape how we think and behave. A person who practices gratitude regularly begins noticing more reasons for appreciation. A person who practices learning regularly becomes more adaptable. A person who practices courage regularly becomes more comfortable with uncertainty. The change may appear subtle at first, but subtle changes accumulate. In fact, many transformations occur so gradually that they are difficult to recognize while they are happening. Only after months or years do we fully appreciate how much has changed. This brings us to another important insight. Growth often feels uncomfortable precisely because it involves moving beyond familiar patterns. The deeper mind prefers predictability. Familiar experiences require less energy to process. Even when familiar patterns produce undesirable results, they can still feel safer than the unknown. This creates an interesting paradox. People may sincerely desire change while simultaneously resisting the discomfort associated with change. They want new outcomes but feel pulled toward old habits. They want growth but feel attached to familiarity. They want transformation but feel uneasy when transformation begins. Recognizing this dynamic can prevent unnecessary frustration. Resistance does not always mean we are moving in the wrong direction. Sometimes resistance simply indicates that we are entering unfamiliar territory. Consider physical exercise. When someone begins training after years of inactivity, discomfort often appears. Muscles adapt, endurance develops, strength increases. The temporary discomfort is part of the adaptation process. Mental and emotional growth frequently follows a similar pattern. Developing new habits requires effort. Learning new skills requires effort. Changing perspectives requires effort. The discomfort is not evidence of failure. It is often evidence of development. Understanding this helps us remain committed during periods when progress feels slow or uncertain. It also highlights the importance of self-observation. Many people spend years trying to control external circumstances while paying little attention to internal patterns. Yet lasting change often begins with awareness. What thoughts repeatedly occupy attention? What emotions consistently arise? What assumptions influence decisions? What habits shape daily behavior? These questions are valuable because awareness creates choice. Without awareness, patterns operate automatically. With awareness, patterns become visible. Once visible, they can be examined. Once examined, they can be adjusted. This process requires honesty, but it does not require self-criticism. In fact, excessive self-judgment often slows growth. When people constantly criticize themselves, they direct energy toward resistance rather than learning. A more effective approach involves curiosity. Curiosity asks questions. Curiosity explores possibilities. Curiosity remains open to new information. Instead of asking, what is wrong with me? Curiosity asks, what can I learn from this experience? That shift changes everything. Learning becomes more important than perfection. Progress becomes more important than comparison. Development becomes more important than immediate validation. Over time, this mindset creates resilience because it transforms challenges into sources of information rather than sources of identity. A setback becomes feedback. A mistake becomes a lesson. An obstacle becomes an opportunity to adapt. This perspective does not eliminate difficulty, but it changes our relationship with difficulty. And relationships matter. The relationship we have with money matters. The relationship we have with time matters. The relationship we have with uncertainty matters. Most importantly, the relationship we have with ourselves influences every other relationship in our lives. If we constantly doubt our ability to learn, growth becomes harder. If we trust our capacity to adapt, challenges become more manageable. Confidence, in this sense, is not blind optimism. It is trust developed through experience. It emerges when we repeatedly demonstrate to ourselves that we can learn, adjust, and move forward. Each challenge overcome becomes evidence. Each lesson learned becomes evidence. Each meaningful step forward becomes evidence. Gradually, a new narrative forms. Instead of seeing ourselves as passive observers of circumstances, we begin seeing ourselves as active participants in our development. And this shift may be one of the most important transformations a person can experience. Because the moment we recognize our ability to influence how we think, how we respond, and how we grow, we begin stepping into a different relationship with possibility itself. Yet there is still a deeper layer waiting to be explored. Because beyond habits, beyond beliefs, beyond even the subconscious patterns that shape behavior, there exists a remarkable human capacity that influences every decision we make. The ability to assign meaning to our experiences, and through that meaning determine whether the events of our lives become sources of limitation or catalysts for extraordinary transformation. And that ability to assign meaning may be one of the most powerful forces shaping human experience. Two individuals can encounter the same event and emerge with completely different interpretations. One sees a setback, the other sees a lesson. One sees evidence of limitation, the other sees evidence of growth. The circumstances may be identical, yet the meaning attached to those circumstances creates entirely different futures. This is not because reality changes according to preference. Reality remains reality. The difference lies in how we respond to it. Meaning acts like a lens through which experience is filtered. It influences emotion, it influences behavior, it influences what we expect from ourselves and from the world around us. Consider a challenge that initially appeared devastating but later became a turning point in your life. Many people can identify such moments. At the time, the experience felt negative, perhaps even overwhelming, yet with distance and perspective, its significance changed. What once appeared to be an obstacle became part of a larger story of growth. This illustrates something profound. The meaning of an event is not always contained within the event itself. Often meaning emerges through interpretation. This realization gives us an extraordinary degree of freedom. It means that while we cannot control every circumstance, we can influence the story we tell about those circumstances. And stories matter. Human beings naturally organize experience through narrative. We create explanations. We connect events. We search for patterns. In many ways, our lives are shaped not only by what happens, but by the stories we construct about what happens. A person who repeatedly tells themselves a story of helplessness may begin acting accordingly. A person who repeatedly tells themselves a story of resilience may behave very differently. Neither story guarantees specific outcomes, yet both influence the decisions that eventually shape outcomes. This is why self-talk deserves attention. Most people speak to themselves more frequently than they speak to anyone else. The internal dialogue running throughout the day subtly influences confidence, motivation, and emotional well-being. Unfortunately, many individuals maintain standards for themselves that they would never impose on another person. They forgive others while criticizing themselves. They encourage others while doubting themselves. They recognize potential in others while overlooking their own capacity for growth. Over time, these patterns affect behavior. The deeper mind listens to repetition. Whatever messages are repeated consistently begin shaping expectations. If a person constantly reinforces limitation, limitation becomes more believable. If a person consistently reinforces growth, learning, and possibility, different expectations emerge. Again, this is not about pretending challenges do not exist. It is about choosing interpretations that support constructive action rather than paralysis. Constructive interpretations create movement. Destructive interpretations create stagnation. This distinction becomes especially important during periods of uncertainty. When the future is unclear, the mind naturally seeks certainty, yet certainty is often unavailable. Life unfolds through changing conditions, unexpected developments, and evolving circumstances. In such moments, the stories we tell ourselves become even more influential. Do we interpret uncertainty as danger, or do we interpret uncertainty as possibility? Do we view change as a threat, or do we view change as an opportunity for adaptation? The answers to these questions influence emotional responses long before external results appear. This is one reason adaptability has become such a valuable skill in the modern world. The pace of change continues accelerating, technologies evolve rapidly, industries transform, new opportunities emerge while old assumptions disappear. In such an environment, rigid thinking becomes increasingly difficult to sustain. Flexibility becomes an advantage. Curiosity becomes an advantage. Lifelong learning becomes an advantage. The individuals who thrive are often not those who know the most. They are those who remain willing to learn. Learning requires humility. It requires acknowledging that current understanding may be incomplete. It requires openness to new information, and it requires the courage to update beliefs when evidence suggests a better perspective. This willingness to evolve is a defining characteristic of growth. Nature demonstrates it continuously. Living systems survive because they adapt. Species evolve because they respond to changing environments. Resilience emerges through flexibility rather than rigidity. Human development follows a similar principle. The more adaptable we become, the more effectively we navigate uncertainty. The more effectively we navigate uncertainty, the more opportunities we are able to recognize and pursue. This creates an interesting relationship between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge involves accumulating information. Wisdom involves applying information effectively. A person may possess extensive knowledge yet struggle to translate it into meaningful action. Another person may possess less information but consistently apply what they know. Over time, practical application often creates greater results. This is why experience remains such a powerful teacher. Experience transforms abstract concepts into lived understanding. It converts theory into reality. It reveals strengths and weaknesses that cannot always be discovered through observation alone. Most importantly, experience teaches nuance. Life rarely operates according to simple formulas. Human behavior is complex. Circumstances vary. Outcomes are influenced by countless interacting factors. Wisdom emerges when we learn to navigate this complexity without becoming overwhelmed by it. Instead of seeking perfect certainty, we develop better judgment. Instead of demanding complete control, we develop greater adaptability. Instead of fearing every unknown, we cultivate trust in our ability to learn and respond. This trust becomes a source of stability, not because it guarantees success, but because it reduces dependence on external conditions. When confidence is based entirely on circumstances, it rises and falls with every challenge. When confidence is based on the ability to learn, adapt, and grow, it becomes more resilient. And perhaps this is where prosperity reveals one of its deepest dimensions. Beyond financial resources, beyond professional achievement, beyond external accomplishments, There is a form of wealth rooted in awareness, adaptability, purpose, and self-mastery. A person possessing these qualities carries value wherever they go. They create opportunities rather than merely waiting for them. They respond creatively rather than reactively. They remain open to growth even when circumstances become difficult. And as we continue exploring the hidden dynamics that shape human potential, we arrive at a question that may connect everything we have discussed so far, from attention and belief to emotion, biology, imagination, habits, and meaning. What happens when all of these elements begin working together in alignment, creating a state in which thought, feeling, intention, and action reinforce one another instead of pulling in opposite directions? And when thought, feeling, intention, and action begin reinforcing one another instead of competing for control, a remarkable shift occurs. Energy that was once divided becomes organized. Internal conflict begins to decrease. Decisions become clearer. Progress becomes more sustainable because our efforts are no longer being pulled in opposing directions. Many people experience life as a series of contradictions. They want one thing but habitually move toward another. They set goals but maintain routines that undermine those goals. They desire change while unconsciously preserving the conditions that keep them the same. This conflict is more common than most people realize. Part of the reason is that human beings operate through multiple layers of motivation. We may consciously pursue growth while subconsciously seeking safety. We may desire expansion while fearing uncertainty. We may seek opportunity while remaining attached to familiarity. None of these tendencies are signs of weakness. They are natural aspects of being human. The challenge is not eliminating these competing influences. The challenge is becoming aware of them. Awareness allows us to recognize where our energy is fragmented. And fragmentation carries a cost. Imagine trying to drive a vehicle while simultaneously pressing the accelerator and the brake. Movement becomes inefficient. Progress requires far more effort than necessary. The system works against itself. The same principle applies psychologically. When our beliefs, emotions, and actions move in different directions, progress often feels exhausting. By contrast, alignment creates efficiency. When values support goals, decisions become easier. When emotions support action, motivation becomes more sustainable. When habits support intentions, consistency increases naturally. This is why clarity of values is so important. Many people spend years pursuing objectives they never truly examine. They chase symbols of success because those symbols are culturally admired. They pursue goals because others expect them to. They follow paths that appear impressive yet feel disconnected from personal meaning. Eventually, a question emerges. What am I actually trying to create? Not what others want. Not what social expectations demand. Not what appears successful from the outside. But what genuinely matters. This question often marks the beginning of deeper self-awareness, because meaningful goals possess a different quality than borrowed goals. Meaningful goals generate energy. They create engagement. They sustain effort during difficult periods. Borrowed goals often produce the opposite effect. They require constant external motivation because they lack deep internal connection. When people align their actions with personally meaningful values, resilience tends to increase. Difficulties still occur, setbacks still occur, uncertainty still occurs. Yet challenges become easier to navigate because the purpose behind the effort remains clear. Purpose functions like a compass. A compass does not eliminate storms. It does not remove obstacles. It simply provides direction. And direction matters enormously during periods of uncertainty. Without direction, every obstacle appears overwhelming. With direction, obstacles become navigational challenges rather than reasons to stop. This understanding also changes how we think about achievement. Many individuals assume success is primarily the result of extraordinary effort. Effort certainly matters. Yet effort alone is not always the determining factor. Direction matters. Focus matters. Consistency matters. A small amount of energy applied consistently toward a meaningful objective often creates greater results than large amounts of scattered effort. Nature provides countless examples. Sunlight warms the earth, yet when light becomes concentrated through a lens, its power increases dramatically. Human attention operates similarly. Scattered attention produces scattered results. Focused attention produces greater impact. This is one reason distraction has become such an important challenge in modern life. Never before have human beings had access to so much information, yet information alone does not create wisdom. In fact, excessive information can sometimes create confusion. People consume endless content while spending little time reflecting upon it. They gather knowledge without integration. They collect ideas without application. As a result, mental activity increases while meaningful transformation remains limited. Reflection serves as a bridge between information and understanding. It allows experience to become insight. It allows knowledge to become wisdom. Without reflection, lessons often pass unnoticed. With reflection, even ordinary experiences become valuable teachers. This is why many of history's most influential thinkers devoted time to contemplation. They understood that insight rarely emerges from constant activity alone. The mind requires periods of stillness to organize information, identify patterns, and generate deeper understanding. Stillness, however, is frequently misunderstood. Many people associate stillness with inactivity. In reality, stillness often creates the conditions necessary for clarity. When mental noise decreases, important signals become easier to recognize. Creative ideas emerge. Connections become visible. Priorities become clearer. The deeper mind has room to contribute. This process helps explain why some of our best ideas arrive during walks, quiet moments, or periods when attention relaxes. The conscious mind focuses intensely on a problem. The deeper mind continues processing. Eventually, insight surfaces. These moments may feel mysterious, but they reflect the extraordinary complexity of human cognition. We are far more than our moment-to-moment thoughts. Beneath conscious awareness, countless processes support learning, creativity, adaptation, and growth. The more we understand this relationship, the more effectively we can work with it. Instead of forcing every solution, we learn to balance effort with openness. Instead of demanding immediate answers, we create conditions in which answers can emerge. Instead of treating uncertainty as an enemy, we begin recognizing it as part of discovery. After all, every breakthrough once existed within uncertainty. Every innovation emerged from questions that lacked answers. Every meaningful journey began before the destination was visible. The willingness to move forward despite incomplete information has always been a defining characteristic of explorers, creators, and innovators, and perhaps it is also a defining characteristic of personal transformation. Because growth rarely reveals the entire path at once. More often, it reveals the next step, then another, over time. Those steps create a journey that would have seemed impossible from the starting point. And as we continue examining the hidden forces that influence prosperity, fulfillment, and human potential, we arrive at an insight that may unite everything we have explored so far. The realization that the quality of our lives is shaped not only by what we experience, but by the patterns of awareness through which we experience it. And understanding those patterns may be the key to unlocking levels of possibility that most people spend their entire lives overlooking. And once we begin paying attention to those patterns of awareness, we start noticing something extraordinary. Much of what shapes our lives operates quietly in the background. It is not the dramatic moments that determine our direction as much as the repeated patterns we rarely question. Small perceptions become habits. Habits become behaviors. Behaviors become outcomes. Outcomes reinforce perceptions. A cycle forms often without our conscious awareness. This cycle can either expand possibility or restrict it. For many people, life becomes a process of reacting to circumstances. External events dictate emotional states. Challenges determine confidence levels. Success creates temporary motivation, while setbacks create discouragement. In this model, power appears to reside outside the individual. But there is another way to understand human experience. Instead of seeing ourselves merely as reactors to events, we can begin viewing ourselves as participants in a continuous process of interpretation, adaptation, and creation. We may not control every circumstance, but we do influence how we engage with those circumstances. This distinction is subtle, yet it changes everything. Imagine two people facing an uncertain future. Neither knows exactly what will happen. Neither possesses complete information. Yet one becomes immobilized by fear, while the other becomes motivated by curiosity. The future remains uncertain for both individuals. The difference lies in their relationship with uncertainty. One interprets uncertainty as evidence of danger. The other interprets uncertainty as space for possibility. That interpretation influences emotion. Emotion influences behavior. Behavior influences outcomes. Over time, the consequences compound. This is why awareness itself can become a transformative practice. Awareness allows us to step back from automatic reactions and observe them rather than immediately obey them. A thought appears, an emotion appears, a fear appears, a doubt appears. Instead of becoming completely identified with these experiences, we can learn to observe them. Observation creates distance. Distance creates choice. Choice creates freedom. Without awareness, a person may assume every thought is true. With awareness, a person begins evaluating thoughts rather than automatically believing them. This shift represents a profound development in human consciousness. Consider how often people limit themselves based on assumptions that have never been tested. I'm not capable enough. It's too late. I've missed my opportunity. People like me don't succeed. These statements may feel convincing because they are repeated frequently. Yet repetition alone does not transform an assumption into reality. The human mind is remarkably persuasive. It can generate arguments for both limitation and possibility. The question is not whether thoughts appear. The question is whether we examine them. This examination requires courage because familiar beliefs often become part of identity. Challenging them can feel uncomfortable. Yet growth frequently begins where unquestioned assumptions end. History provides countless examples of this principle. For centuries, people accepted limitations that later proved inaccurate. Scientific breakthroughs emerged when existing assumptions were challenged. Technological revolutions emerged when accepted boundaries were questioned. Social progress emerged when inherited beliefs were re-examined. The same process occurs within individuals. Personal breakthroughs often begin when someone becomes willing to question a story they have carried for years. Perhaps they believed they lacked talent. Perhaps they believed they lacked opportunity. Perhaps they believed change was impossible. Then something shifts. A new perspective appears. A new experience provides evidence. A new possibility becomes visible. And once possibility becomes visible, behavior begins changing. This is one reason learning remains so powerful throughout life. Learning expands perception. Expanded perception reveals options that were previously invisible. New options create new choices. New choices create new outcomes. In this sense, education is far more than the accumulation of information. It is the expansion of awareness. Every meaningful insight enlarges the map through which we navigate reality. The larger the map, the more possibilities we can recognize. The more possibilities we recognize, the more effectively we can respond to change. This relationship between awareness and possibility becomes increasingly important in a rapidly evolving world. The future is rarely shaped by those who cling most tightly to the past. More often, it is shaped by those who remain capable of learning, adapting, and reimagining what is possible. Adaptability is not simply a practical skill, it is a state of mind. It reflects a willingness to remain open, to remain curious, to continue evolving. And evolution is not limited to technology, careers, or external achievements. Human beings themselves continue evolving through experience. Every challenge teaches something. Every relationship teaches something. Every success teaches something. Every failure teaches something. The question is whether we remain receptive to the lesson. Some people experience difficulty and become more rigid. Others experience difficulty and become wiser. The event may be similar. The response differs. Over time, these responses accumulate into entirely different lives. This brings us to an insight that many people overlook when discussing prosperity and success. External achievement is important, but it is not the only form of growth. A person can increase income while remaining emotionally reactive. A person can gain status while remaining deeply insecure. A person can accumulate resources while lacking fulfillment. True development involves more than external expansion. It includes the growth of awareness, the growth of wisdom, the growth of emotional maturity, the growth of self-understanding. These qualities influence every area of life because they affect how we interpret and respond to experience. And perhaps that is the deeper opportunity hidden within every challenge, every ambition, and every goal. The opportunity is not merely to achieve something. The opportunity is to become something, to become more aware, more capable, more resilient, more intentional, more aligned with the values that genuinely matter. Because ultimately, the most meaningful transformations are not always visible from the outside. They occur within perception itself. They occur when the way we see the world changes. And when perception changes, behavior changes. When behavior changes, outcomes change. When outcomes change, entirely new possibilities emerge. And this raises a fascinating question that sits at the intersection of consciousness, human potential, and personal growth. If awareness itself can reshape the way we perceive opportunities, challenges, and possibilities, then what happens when we intentionally cultivate states of mind that allow us to access our highest levels of clarity, creativity, focus, and insight on a consistent basis rather than only by accident? And if we can intentionally cultivate those higher levels of clarity, creativity, focus, and insight, then personal growth begins to look very different from the way it is commonly portrayed. Instead of waiting for inspiration to arrive unexpectedly, we begin creating the conditions that make inspiration more likely. Instead of hoping for better decisions, we develop the habits that support better thinking. Instead of reacting to life unconsciously, we participate in it more deliberately. This shift from passive experience to active awareness may be one of the most valuable developments available to human beings. Most people understand the importance of managing external resources. They manage time, finances, schedules, and responsibilities, yet far fewer people learn how to manage internal resources. Attention is a resource. Energy is a resource. Emotional stability is a resource. Mental clarity is a resource. The quality of these internal resources often determines how effectively external resources are used. Two people may possess similar opportunities, similar education, and similar circumstances, yet if one consistently operates from distraction, emotional reactivity, and confusion, while the other operates from clarity, focus, and purpose, the results can diverge dramatically over time. This is why self-mastery has been valued throughout history. Not because it grants control over everything, but because it improves our relationship with the things we can influence. Self-mastery begins with observation. Before we can improve attention, we must notice where attention goes. Before we can improve habits, we must notice existing habits. Before we can improve emotional responses, we must become aware of those responses. Awareness always comes first. Many people attempt to change behavior without understanding the patterns driving that behavior. They focus on symptoms while ignoring causes. As a result, progress often remains temporary. Lasting transformation usually occurs at a deeper level. Imagine a gardener attempting to improve the health of a tree. Painting the leaves would accomplish little. The roots must be nourished. The conditions supporting growth must be strengthened. Human development follows a similar principle. Outcomes matter, but the patterns producing those outcomes matter even more. When underlying patterns change, results often follow naturally. This understanding invites us to think differently about daily life. Every day provides opportunities to reinforce patterns. Each thought strengthens a pathway. Each action strengthens a pathway. Each repeated emotional response strengthens a pathway. Over time, these pathways influence what feels natural, comfortable, and automatic. The encouraging aspect of this process is that change remains possible throughout life. Human beings possess an extraordinary capacity for learning and adaptation. New skills can be developed, new habits can be formed, new perspectives can emerge. Growth does not require becoming someone else. It requires becoming more conscious of who we already are and how we choose to engage with reality. This distinction is important because many people pursue self-improvement from a place of inadequacy. They assume something is fundamentally missing. They chase endless achievement, hoping it will eventually produce a sense of worth. Yet worth and achievement are not the same thing. Achievement can be valuable. Achievement can create opportunity. Achievement can expand influence. But genuine confidence tends to emerge from something deeper. It emerges from trust. Trust in our ability to learn. Trust in our ability to adapt. Trust in our ability to face uncertainty and continue moving forward. This form of confidence is resilient because it is not dependent upon perfect outcomes. When confidence depends entirely on success, failure becomes terrifying. When confidence depends on adaptability, setbacks become manageable. The difference is profound. One mindset seeks guarantees, the other develops capability. Capability often proves far more valuable. Guarantees are rare. Capability travels with us wherever we go. Markets change. Technologies change. Industries change. Circumstances change. But the ability to learn, create, communicate, solve problems, and adapt remains useful across countless situations. This is one reason lifelong learning has become increasingly important. The future belongs not necessarily to those who know the most today, but to those who continue learning tomorrow. Curiosity fuels this process. Curiosity keeps the mind flexible. It prevents stagnation. It encourages exploration. Most importantly, curiosity transforms uncertainty. Instead of seeing uncertainty solely as a threat, curiosity sees it as information waiting to be discovered. This perspective creates psychological freedom. Freedom from needing every answer immediately. Freedom from pretending certainty where none exists. Freedom from allowing fear of the unknown to prevent growth. Throughout history, explorers ventured into territories they could not fully map in advance. Scientists pursued questions whose answers were unknown. Innovators experimented without guarantees of success. Progress has always required a willingness to engage with uncertainty. Personal transformation requires the same willingness. No one can see every step of their future. No one possesses complete information. No one can eliminate risk entirely. Yet meaningful growth remains possible. In fact, growth often depends upon embracing the very uncertainty we try so hard to avoid. This does not mean acting recklessly. It means recognizing that clarity frequently emerges through movement. A path becomes visible because we walk it. A skill develops because we practice it. A relationship deepens because we invest in it. A vision becomes reality because we engage with it consistently over time. Action reveals information that thought alone cannot provide. At the same time, action becomes most effective when paired with reflection. Without reflection, experience can pass by unnoticed. With reflection, experience becomes wisdom. Reflection allows us to identify patterns. It reveals what works and what does not. It transforms events into lessons. Over years, this process creates something extraordinarily valuable: perspective. Perspective allows us to see beyond immediate circumstances. It helps us recognize temporary setbacks without defining ourselves by them. It enables us to maintain direction even when conditions fluctuate. And perhaps perspective is one of the hidden forms of wealth that few people discuss. Because while money can expand options, perspective expands understanding. While resources can create opportunity, perspective helps us recognize opportunity. While success can provide advantages, perspective helps us use those advantages wisely. And when perspective, awareness, purpose, adaptability, and focused action begin working together, a person develops an entirely different relationship with possibility, one that raises an even deeper question about the nature of human potential itself. If our lives are shaped by the patterns we repeatedly reinforce, then what extraordinary possibilities might emerge when we consciously choose those patterns rather than inheriting them unconsciously from the past?
One of the deepest ideas explored throughout this discussion is that our lives are shaped not only by external circumstances, but by the patterns of awareness through which we experience those circumstances. This may sound abstract at first, but it becomes very practical when we examine everyday life. Imagine two people stuck in traffic. Both are experiencing the exact same situation. One becomes frustrated, stressed, and emotionally drained. The other uses the time to reflect, listen to something educational, or simply practice patience. The traffic is identical. The difference lies in perception and response. Modern neuroscience helps explain why this matters. The brain is not simply recording reality like a camera. Instead, it constantly filters information. Every second, your senses collect more information than your conscious mind can process. To manage this, the brain decides what deserves attention based largely on your beliefs, expectations, habits, and past experiences. Think of it like searching for a friend in a crowded stadium. The moment you know who you are looking for, your attention begins filtering out thousands of distractions. Suddenly, what seemed impossible becomes easier. In a similar way, your mind tends to notice evidence that supports the beliefs you repeatedly reinforce. This does not mean beliefs magically change reality. It means beliefs influence what you notice, how you interpret situations, and ultimately how you behave. For example, if someone believes opportunities are rare, they may overlook possibilities that are right in front of them. Another person with a growth oriented mindset may notice the same circumstances and identify opportunities for learning, improvement, or collaboration. This is why awareness is so important. Awareness gives us the ability to observe our thoughts instead of automatically obeying them. A practical exercise is to spend a few minutes each day observing your thoughts without judging them. Notice recurring themes. Do your thoughts focus primarily on possibilities or problems, growth or limitation, creation or fear? The goal is not to force positivity. The goal is simply to become aware of the patterns already operating in your mind. Another major concept from the discussion is the connection between emotions and biology. Many people think emotions exist only in the mind, but emotions influence the entire body. When you experience stress, your breathing changes, your muscles tighten, your heart rate may increase. When you feel calm, grateful, or inspired, different biological responses occur. Think about preparing for an important presentation. If you spend hours imagining failure, your body may react as though the threat is already real. Stress increases, focus decreases, confidence weakens. Yet, if you prepare carefully and imagine yourself responding effectively, your body often enters a more resourceful state. The key lesson is that repeated emotional states become familiar patterns. Just as physical exercise strengthens muscles, repeated emotional experiences strengthen mental and biological pathways. This is why daily practices matter. Small actions performed consistently often create greater change than dramatic actions performed occasionally. Consider physical fitness. Most people understand that a single workout does not transform the body. Results come through repetition. The same principle applies to mindset, emotional resilience, and personal growth. If you spend 10 minutes each day learning a new skill, that effort compounds. If you spend 10 minutes each day reflecting on your experiences, that wisdom compounds. If you spend 10 minutes each day strengthening focus and attention, that clarity compounds. Growth often appears invisible in the beginning because the changes are occurring beneath the surface. A useful analogy is planting a seed. After planting it, you may see nothing for days or weeks, yet beneath the soil, roots are forming. Essential development is taking place. Human growth works much the same way. Many important transformations occur before visible results appear. This understanding leads to another important lesson. Patience is not passive waiting. Patience is active trust in a meaningful process. Many people abandon goals too early because they expect immediate evidence. When results do not appear quickly, they assume nothing is happening. Yet nearly every meaningful achievement requires a period of invisible growth. Another concept worth exploring is the power of attention. Attention is one of the most valuable resources you possess. Wherever attention goes, energy tends to follow. Imagine trying to read a book while checking your phone every 30 seconds. Your attention becomes fragmented. Learning slows down, understanding becomes shallow. Now imagine giving that same book your full attention for 30 uninterrupted minutes. The quality of learning changes dramatically. The same principle applies to life goals. Focused attention creates momentum. Scattered attention often creates frustration. One practical habit is choosing a single priority each day. Instead of trying to improve everything at once, identify one action that would move your life forward in a meaningful way. Then give that action your full attention. The discussion also explored the role of imagination. Imagination is not merely fantasy, it is the ability to mentally explore possibilities before they exist. Every invention began as an idea. Every business began as an idea. Every meaningful life change began as an idea. Imagination allows us to rehearse possibilities before taking action. However, imagination becomes powerful only when paired with action. Vision without action remains a dream. Action without vision often lacks direction. A practical exercise is to spend a few minutes each morning imagining the best version of yourself, responding to the day ahead. How would that version of you handle challenges, communicate with others, make decisions? Then look for opportunities to embody those qualities throughout the day. Perhaps the most important lesson of all is that personal growth is less about changing who you are and more about becoming conscious of the patterns shaping your experience. Every day, you are reinforcing something: a belief, a habit, a perspective, a way of responding to life. The question is whether those patterns are being chosen consciously or inherited automatically. The more awareness you develop, the more choice you gain. The more choice you gain, the more intentional your actions become. And the more intentional your actions become, the more your life begins reflecting your deepest values rather than your oldest conditioning. This is the real opportunity hidden within human potential. Not the ability to control every circumstance, but the ability to transform the way we meet those circumstances. And through that transformation, gradually create a life defined by purpose, resilience, clarity, and conscious growth.